All right, well, it looks like it is time to start. So thank you everyone for coming to Preparing for Personalization. We hope that you get value out of learning from our thoughts and experience in working with personalization. My name is Amanda Rosine, and I have about 20 years of experience working in digital, which means that I've got a lot of experience wanting personalization to work and a bit less experience with working personalization. And one of my earliest experiences in even talking about personalization using those words was back in maybe 2007, working on a web experience for real estate. And we wanted to tailor content based on what people had interacted with so that they would see properties that were similar to what they wanted. But we were also working with a homegrown CMS and didn't have a personalization engine. So that was not at all successful and not anywhere near as successful as it would be if we were working on that today. And now I'll let my co-presenter introduce himself.
Hey, my name is Chris Cretons. I am the Vice President of Digital Engineering at Bounteous. And my first experience with personalization happened probably about 5 or 6 years ago, where we helped the client implement Acquia Lift 1.0 on their site. And we built some custom plugins to work with Eloqua. And so we were able to build a custom experience based on the email campaigns that the client was using. So before we dive into the talk, a little bit about us. Amanda and I both work for a company called Bounteous. We were founded back in 2003, been around in the Drupal community for a long time. And we've got a ton of great folks working in a variety of different areas. We work with a lot of different folks. We don't just do Drupal, but we do a lot of Drupal, work with some pretty amazing companies. And we're pretty excited to be here today talking about personalization with you. So, personalization, been around for a long time. Everyone talks about it. It's great. If we get into the way back machine and we go way back, and yes, 2015 is way back in technology space, we find all sorts of articles telling us that, everyone is doing personalization. Everyone wants personalization. You need to be doing personalization. And when I think about personalization, this is the essence of personalization for me. If you knew everything about an individual, how would you change that person's experience? Now, two people coming to your site or your mobile app or whatever it is, they have different hopes and dreams. And more crucially for you, they have different purchase histories and interaction histories, things of that nature, different preferences. So using what we know about the person will help us make their experiences better.
If you want to advance the screen, it looks like it might be stuck on the beginning.
It is not for me.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, if it's wrong for me, I certainly don't need to see it.
If you think about personalization, what happens if we have perfect information? We can do lots of different things. We can hide the wrong information. We can make the right recommendation. We can incorporate preferences. We can show better or more relevant information. We can simplify the experience. We can send the right message, right? So lots of different things that we can do. I think a lot about this, and I'll give you an example of where we're not doing a great job or someone isn't. I use a local bank. And whenever I need cash, I go to the local branch that's a couple blocks from my house. I go to the same ATM and I insert my card and I type in my PIN, and then I do the same thing every time. I select the language that I want to interact in. I select the same transaction from the same account for the same amount of money while telling it that I do not need a receipt and I do not need to see my balance. So my bank knows a lot about me, and in particular, they know a lot about how I interact with the ATM. So they could use this information to make my experience so much better. Since I've done this dozens upon dozens of times, I probably don't need to tell them that English is the way I prefer to interact with the machine. And if they were even more on top of their game, they could understand that every time I take out money, I take $100 out of my checking account and I do not get a receipt. So they could give me a button that just lets me do that thing that I do all the time. And the person behind me probably has a whole different set of habits and preferences, and she'll get a different experience. So if we have that perfect information, what can we do to make their experience that much better? So we talk about personalization, and the one thing to be clear, Amanda and I are not here to tell you that you should start doing personalization today. However, what we want to talk about is being prepared. A little bit of preparation will make personalization easier when you're ready to go. Personalization is a team sport. And too often we get stuck in our bubbles, designing or building the technology, and we don't necessarily think or know about all the downstream effects that we'll have. There are many roles that are needed for a successful personalization program, and there are many tools that we can use to do personalization. So how do you prepare your digital platform and your team for when you're ready? We're going to break this down into 5 steps. We're going to talk about how you collaborate as a team, how you evaluate your current situation, how you create and test a hypothesis, how you prioritize what you want to test or implement, and how you create a plan for your personalization program. So to start, Amanda is going to talk about collaboration.
Thanks, Chris. So step 1 is collaboration. And as Chris was saying, personalization really is a team sport. So we need to acknowledge that any brand experience out there in the world is created by many people: designers, engineers, content authors, and more. So as a thought experiment, think about your absolute favorite company's digital ecosystem. So that could be made up of websites or apps, kiosks. It could be e-commerce. We could think about social media platforms, and there's more. So if we look back to the question that Chris asked, which is, if you knew everything about an individual, how would you change that person's experience? You might be able to think of dozens of ways that you could personalize moments that matter across that digital ecosystem. And those large, expansive ecosystems are made by dozens, if not hundreds of people. And they probably sit on different teams, in different departments, and potentially across different companies. And effective personalization efforts really require people to work together, sometimes in new ways. And the best solutions happen when you bring people together across disciplines. Getting diverse teams with a variety of skill sets and a variety of perspectives are critical for driving innovation and for getting the types of optimized business results that companies are looking for today. And this isn't new news. If you think back 5 or 10 years ago, this was a topic of conversation for how to drive better customer experiences. And we found then, as we're finding now, that instead of having siloed teams that work within their own swim lanes, it's better when you align on common goals and work together. So for organizations who are considering dipping their toes into personalization, it's really time to create those cross-functional teams now. So for some organizations, this could be a very small number of people. And for larger or more complex organizations, it could be a large number of people with a large number of backgrounds and perspectives. It could even be people that work for partner agencies or consultancies outside of your organization. So if you're in a complex organization, I would personally recommend brainstorming all of the different types of disciplines that you would need in order to make your personalization efforts successful, and try and identify who the key people are within those groups that you can partner with to help you be more successful. And this might sound kind of silly, but one thing I've personally found success with is making little mini personas or profiles for these stakeholders. So you can think through what their personal objectives and goals are, along with any obstacles that they may have and opportunities that you can use to put yourself in a position where you can be a better partner with that person, so that you can kind of create a coalition towards your personalization goals. And ultimately, learning from people with different perspectives helps you break out of the box. As a designer, it's important for us to understand the different users and constituencies that we serve and the needs that they have, the pain points that they have, so we can use the tools of our trade to solve for those needs and pain points while balancing business needs and technology considerations. And certainly, we can't all be experts in all things. I'm certainly not a Google Analytics expert or a Drupal engineer, but by listening to other people and by learning from what they say, we can increase what we can do as a team and ultimately maximize our possible solution set. So for example, if my team is embarking on a personalization project, understanding the insights from our analytics group is going to be equally as important as understanding what the personalization tool can do. And just because we think that the users have a need doesn't mean that it always shows up as true once you look back at what people are doing within an experience. And likewise, I've made the mistake of assuming that it was going to be hard for our engineering team to do something that ended up being quite easy, or vice versa, assuming something would be easy that ended up being quite hard. And that's just from an experience design perspective. So on the flip side, having a personalization initiative doesn't just mean that it's a Drupal initiative. My first project with a proper personalization engine was with Chris almost 5 years ago, where I incorrectly assumed that it was just going to be kind of a technology thing that we would flip on, and that my team might get some requests for creating additional assets. But I learned a ton on that project. And throughout the years, I've seen other people go through that same realization. And although Chris is absolutely an expert and a great person to reach out to when you have a personalization project, it's not just a Chris project or a Drupal project. There are many other disciplines that we would want to get involved, like marketing or experience design. And in addition, Drupal is an important part of a personalization initiative, but the technology team is only one component. How you've built your Drupal platform and what personalization tool you're using will often dictate how heavily involved your development team needs to be. And the process will need skills that your development team might not have in their own toolkit. And certainly it might need a different type of cadence and scheduling. So for example, having a test and learn program centered around personalization, we shouldn't force that to follow the same sprint cadence that we would for normal releases. Which leads us to step 2, evaluate. Where are you in your personalization journey? And at this point, you may have already decided or committed to doing a personalization project and may be thinking, now what? How do you figure out what to do next? Well, there are a few questions that you can ask yourself in order to figure out how ready you are. And the first one, which you may have gathered from the content in the first section, is really whether or not you have the right team in place. So do you have any skill set gaps? And if you do, are those things that you can resolve with training? Do you need to hire people? Are there teammates that you could reach out to across different departments? And you can really think about what you need to do in order to build bridges and work with other people so that you can work across silos. Next question I would have is, do you understand your users and journeys, and is it a shared understanding? Having a clear definition of your users, including customers and any employees that might use your experience, is critical. Do you understand their needs and pain points and opportunities? And does that understanding, is it based on insights and data, or is it based on kind of hunches and assumptions? And then it's also equally important that it's really a shared understanding of these users and journeys. So not just based on your perspective, but across all of those other different teams that I talked about earlier. If different teams are operating from a different set of assumptions, it'll be harder to gain alignment for personalization projects. And personally, I've found that co-creating these journey maps with a diverse set of people and perspectives can rapidly facilitate that shared understanding. So if you can make that collaborative, it works a lot better. And as you're pulling those journeys together, look at your holistic experience. So it includes looking at the customer lifecycle across touch points, both online and offline, and thinking about the different systems that they interact with. And it's also a really good opportunity to think about both internal and external users in gathering this information. So for example, in working with an appliance manufacturer a few years ago, I found that the customer service team had some really great ideas and understanding of what was working and what wasn't working on this manufacturer's website, because they got phone calls from people that were complaining about things that didn't work, or even on the website, or about information that they were looking for that they couldn't find. And that customer service team also had their own set of frequently asked questions and answers, along with a lot of other really great content that was really perfect for repurposing for personalization. And lastly, they had really good historical data for the types of problems that were being reported, which helped us prioritize our prioritization or personalization efforts. And working with the statistics from the customer service team is an example, a perfect example of using data and insights to identify the moments that matter. Of course, that's just one type of input, because you can get insights from analytics, usability testing, customer interviews, and more. But focusing on a data and insights-driven approach really helps take a team from, I think we should do this, to we're going to do this because it's going to have these specific positive outcomes for us. And while you're creating that shared understanding of the users and journeys you have, using data and insights to inform those profiles and journeys will make it easier for you to bring other people kind of to your side and understanding of what you want to achieve. And it will also help you sell your vision across the organization. It'll also help you show which moments will help make the most impact, which in the future will also help you with your prioritization efforts. Another key takeaway is to force yourself to choose which moments you're going to focus on before the project kickoff. And this can't be overstated. It's really important to get that alignment for the business goals and where you want to focus your efforts before everybody kind of gathers together to say, ready, set, go. Because there are so many opportunities for personalization and so many good ideas that can come up. It's easy for the team to lose momentum or for scope creep to happen. And especially when you're at the beginning of a personalization journey, you want to make sure that you've got something targeted that you can approach and be successful with. So the next question, is your design and content ready for personalization, is an absolutely huge topic, big enough for more than one full presentation. But the biggest question I would pose to you is, does your team embrace flexible design principles that adapt as the experience changes? So different aspects of this include, do you have a design system? Or are you making an experience kind of based on the page level or hard coding a lot? Will the page still look great without a particular component, even if you are talking about a specific moment or page? As you're talking about components, could you move it around on the page, or could you move it to a different location within the experience? Do you have many ways that you can answer the question of, like, can you show this content in a different way? Do you have flexibility with how you display imagery and text? Do you have structured content, or is it really just kind of tied up into big blobs? And how easy is it for content authors to build new content? Like, all of these are really indications for how kind of evolved your experience is and your team is towards those flexible design principles. And it's really important to think in systems, let go of the page, and decouple content. And, you know, some of us are farther along on this journey than others. And I know that especially when you're kind of starting off, it can be uncomfortable as a designer or a content author to switch to a model of thinking about the possibility of an experience as opposed to specifically designing a page or a moment within that experience. But it's super important because many of these personalization tools are client side and it loads asynchronously while the page is loading. So the way that we design, we have to create these affordances for changing and adding and removing content as the page loads. So think about whether your design would work if you had to swap content or add a flyout or an overlay, or maybe embed content in a place that it wasn't originally designed, or for example, adding like a news strip at the top of the page. Which leads me to the next question, which is, do you already have a personalization tool? Because the types of examples that I just spoke about for ways that you can personalize content really depend on the tool that you've selected. So if you don't already have your tool, you may need to go through a tool evaluation process or a procurement process. And once you have the tool selected and in place, you've got a different set of readiness questions to answer. And I'll hand it over to Chris to talk you through those.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. You know, I think a lot about the Drupal platform, and, you know, and it's an important part of this personalization journey. And, you know, how do we make sure that that's ready to go? The main question, and the first question really, is how are your pages built? And this is kind of a two-factor question for me. You know, one is I want to look at this from a more broad process view of how the pages are built. So does the content team have the ability to build the content on its own without involving other groups, and specifically development? How long does the process take to get new content out onto the site? Is it minutes? Is it hours, days, weeks, months? We really want the content editors to be able to get content out very quickly, because as we test and learn, we want to react to those things that we're learning. Another angle is more technical angle, and I think about like how we're building the pages within Drupal. So which modules are we using to build out the components and the templates and the pages within the site? If you are using or you're planning to use a personalization tool that integrates tightly with Drupal, say like Acquia's personalization tool, how will that be affected by these choices? How is the data going to flow back and forth between the tool? If you're using a tool that isn't as tightly integrated, then how is the content that you build within that tool going to map back to Drupal once you decide to make those changes permanent? Another question to think about is, how easy is it to target content within the page on a site? A common approach for these personalization tools is to use CSS selectors to find the place, the region on the page to personalize. And so we want to make sure that it's easy to target a particular HTML element. So you can always look at the HTML that's generated and see this for yourself. Are the class names and IDs understandable not just for you as a developer, but also as the person that's going to be using the personalization tool? Do you have IDs on the elements of the page that are most likely to be targeted by the personalization tool? Now, we've worked with a number of different tools, and they're getting better all the time. Lots of them now use point and click that make it really easy to target an element. Yet there are others that use CSS selectors to make you, or to use to identify the region that you want to change. So we want to make good choices now to make it easier on the person that's going to use that personalization tool later. Does the site create dynamic content? And how will your personalization tool handle this? So when we're building the content, are there components that are building content on the fly? Does this impact your personalization tool? A good example of this, we ran into a client where they had a hero banner that was integrating with a third-party video service. And as part of that interaction, when the page was loading, some JavaScript would go out to the video service and it would create a div that was used to build a modal for the video to be shown. Now, the JavaScript, as I mentioned before, with the DOM, it'll find the personalization tools will search the DOM and it will find the element. And a lot of times they'll delete that element and then replace it. So in this particular case, the DOM, we deleted the right element out of the personalization tool deleted one of the elements, but didn't know about the other, so it couldn't delete it and it broke the page, right? So we have to be careful of the ways that we're building content and the ways we're doing things dynamically on the site. Is your JavaScript ready for a personalization tool, your personalization tool? We all use a bunch of JavaScript on our sites now. We want to build rich interactive experiences, and we often rely on JavaScript to do this. As I mentioned, one of the ways that personalization tools work is to delete elements from the DOM and then replace them with new elements. Is your JavaScript prepared to handle this? One of the examples I have is that we use tab components, and those tab components use JavaScript to open and close tabs. If you've attached the event, or you've used the onClick event, and that's what you've attached to make those changes, if your tab component gets deleted out of the DOM, those events go away. And so if you reinsert another tab in its place, it's not going to work. So you need to be really careful about how you're using your JavaScript and understand how it's going to be affected by the personalization tool that you use. Finally, is your content tagged with keywords, personas, or segments? A key to personalization is learning more about our users and what they want to do and the content that they need. One way to do this is by ensuring that the content is built with tagging in mind. And so we can tell what types of personas are going to use this content, or what keywords would we use to describe this content, or is this content related to a specific area on our site? Now, all this information can tell us about the individual, and we can find out, like, is this person interested in baseball or volleyball? Do they like puppies or kittens, right? Knowing what about the individual allows us to target, knowing more about the individual allows us to target content to them. But we can also use this data as our personalization program matures to tell us more about other people. Are there people that view certain content more likely to engage with our site or to buy our products, right? So tagging content in a variety of ways is a great way to get more data, and it'll help us draw some more insights. So, one of the key takeaways, I think, is, to reduce friction for adding new content to your Drupal site. So we want to make sure that our marketing team and our content team can release new content without intervention by the development team. Development teams tend to work on longer cycles, think like 2-week sprints, then we really want the personalization team to work on. Now, there are still going to be some dependencies, right? Some of our testing is going to show that a new component might be the best way to display some information. And then we might have to build that. But that should be, more of an ongoing maintenance type thing. It shouldn't be the day-to-day operation. Another idea is that you should have a page layout that anticipates your personalization needs. So as Amanda was saying, you really want to think about how your page is going to be affected when something is taken away or something is added, because there's a lot of different ways we can personalize content. But you also want to be thinking ahead a little bit. So on our recent website redesign, we knew that we wanted to do personalization as soon as the site went live. And one of the places that we wanted to do that personalization was on our blog pages, or what we call our insights pages. So what we did as a development team was inserted an empty div near the top of the page. And what this allowed our personalization team to do was to target that on certain types of blog posts. We do a lot of Google Analytics training. And so when somebody read enough blogs about Google Tag Manager, we were able to tell them about our Google training program and maybe get them some information that they could use. Next up, Amanda is going to talk about hypotheses.
Yeah, step 3, hypothesize. So at this point, you may have a long list of things that you know that you want to test with personalization. But if not, go back to what Chris was saying earlier. So if you knew everything about an individual, how would you change that person's experience? And as a thought experiment, let's imagine that we work for a travel company. So because of COVID-19, there are a number of customers who have had to cancel or reschedule their trips. Well, at the same time, we would want to make sure that we're showcasing all of the work that we're doing to keep people safe and retain all of the positive brand connotations that our customers have. And from a business perspective, we would want to encourage people to rebook and reschedule instead of canceling and asking for refunds. And for your customers, well, you can probably imagine that there are a lot of unknowns when people can travel or if people feel comfortable. So there are a lot of needs that those customers would have. And in my personal case, I was supposed to have taken a trip to Peru earlier this year to do some hiking. Obviously, that was canceled. And the tour company still has my full payment amount and isn't offering refunds, but is offering an incentive to book travel in the future with those funds. So for me, perfect personalization would include knowing that I live in the USA, that I'm a past customer, and that I've got an experience that was booked, but that was canceled, and that I was planning on going to Peru. So I can think of a few things that they could do to help tailor to those criteria. And that would be very different than somebody who lives in the European Union and who's looking to book travel, maybe within the European Union, and could do that later this year. So we have a ton of different options for changing experiences based on what's important to them, how people want to be communicated to, and then based on pain points or opportunity areas within the experience. And there are also a couple of different spectrums for how to think about personalization. On one hand, you could change the experience using rule-based personalization based on the user's current behaviors. Or on the other end, you can change the experience based on predictions, based on what their behaviors will be. You can also change the experience for groups of people based on defined segments, which can be quite broad, or you can narrow down your focus with hyper-personalized experiences. And any organization they don't need to start at the mature end of the spectrum, because personalization can really be evolutionary and your organization can get there over time. So if you're wondering about how to get started, profiling audience members based on contextual cues or segment rather than having something at the individual level can be an easier way to take your first step. So in my case, or the example of the travel company, you could create 2 segments, people who have had tours canceled and everybody else. And if you were able to create 2 different experiences and show that to those 2 different segments, like that would be a successful test with personalization. Gartner had done a paper last year talking about these 2 spectrums and some of the expectations and challenges of trying to reach that hyper-personalized, AI-driven personalization level of maturity. And often underinvesting or not understanding the scope has been really the challenge for organizations. Really one of the misconceptions is that in order to do personalization, you have to jump in and be as mature as an Amazon or a Netflix, whereas really anybody could start with some personalization, and it can often start with a really simple idea. And really that personalization can begin at the very earliest stages of developing an experience. So for example, today we wouldn't think about building a website that wasn't responsive or didn't take into account different viewport sizes or device types. And that's a form of personalization. So going back to the travel company, they should be able to tell that I'm in the US. And based on current travel restrictions, they might have an idea of which tours might be available to me sooner rather than later. and probably only show me things that are within the USA. This company could also tell that I'm a past customer and that I've had a tour canceled. And based on my history, they should be able to tell that I like nature and hiking and that I'm an outdoor enthusiast. And on the most mature end of the spectrums, they may be able to recommend experiences to me based on what I've done in the past and what other people like me have enjoyed. So there's always a ton of things that we could do, and trying to brainstorm what to test is really the fun part. There are so many possibilities and a lot of different ways to brainstorm ideas for things that you could test. You could look at highest value changes. So thinking about things that would help reduce cost or drive revenue. You could start with a list of known problems and really think about ways that you can fix those problems that are negatively impacting your customers. Or you could do your own kind of expert review or audit where you write down everything that comes to mind as you go through your experience. Or on the other end, you could do usability testing and see what you can hear people talk about or see them experiencing, both from a problem perspective, but also from a latent needs perspective. And last but not least, you can review what the analytics data are showing you. And once you have that list of ideas, I always recommend turning them into hypotheses. The recommendation to focus on hypotheses is because it helps create that shared understanding with all of those other people working on your personalization project with you. And it can help really communicate the value of the effort that you and your team is putting in. So we recommend starting with a clearly defined goal, examining evidence from data and insights, and then really phrasing your ideas into if action, then testable outcome. After all, personalization allows us to test these hypotheses. So let's go through an example. And as a quick caveat, the example I'm going to talk through might not make as much sense if you aren't in the USA, because it's specific to the context of healthcare. So let's say that you work for a marketing team at a hospital system. So multiple hospitals, maybe multiple clinics, hundreds or maybe thousands of doctors or practitioners or caregivers. And if you work on that marketing team, you might be associated with driving revenue for a particular part of that system. So in this case, it might be for the joint replacement center. So they want to make sure that they're making money at the same time that they're finding people that need care so that they can provide care to those people. And if we're talking specifically about joint replacement and specifically knee pain, those people are great candidates for knee replacement surgery. And oftentimes they'll go to seminars where they can learn more. So the particular business goal here is to increase the number of people who register and attend these seminars so that they can get the care that they need, as well as helping the hospital get the revenue that they need. So this team might look at evidence. And during this evidence gathering, the company can learn from their customer service representatives, and they can look at the analytics, and they might find that people actually do visit the website and do their homework. So they're visiting at least 3 times before they end up registering for one of these seminars. And they might also be able to look and see that knee replacement is one of the top site searches. As some additional evidence, during creation of their shared vision, this cross-disciplinary team could also then know that there's going to be some marketing efforts that are taking place, like email campaigns and paid search that help drive people to the care that they need at this joint replacement center. So these teams could create hypotheses based on that. So if somebody has searched for knee replacement or has visited the joint replacement center, so based on those behavioral actions, they might be a good candidate for putting into a segment based on that behavior. And you could extrapolate on that, saying, if you created these segments based on those behaviors, you could hypothesize that you might want to follow up with an email if you have their email information and they're already patients of the hospital system. And even further, if somebody has engaged with that content in the past on the website or an email, that would mean you could meaningfully promote that seminar registration on the homepage. And those are all really great testable things that you could do and find out if it works or not. And if you're starting on a personalization project, it's really important to know what hypothesis you're testing. And the reason I say that is I'm sure that everybody has worked on a project at some point and they weren't really sure why the project was happening. And maybe at the time you thought about it being like a pet project, or maybe from the top down, it was something just happening and you did your work. But grounding your personalization project in these insights and by articulating hypotheses, you can really set yourself up and your team up for success because it helps focus on the outcome and the goal. And it helps steer the effort away from things that cost a lot of money, but maybe don't have a lot of value or don't align to your goals. So now I'll give you back to Chris to talk about personalization or prioritization.
Thanks, Amanda. When I think about prioritizing, there's a few different things I like to think about. First of all, we want to think about how we can balance the opinions of what test to do first. The best solutions happen when we bring people across disciplines together. It's a common thread throughout this talk, right? And the sooner we can bring those people together, the better things will be. Now, many companies don't involve the internal constituents until it's too late. Sometimes it's because they don't know better. Other times it's due to siloing. But we really want to build a team that consists of content authors and business owners and architects and experience design people and analysts and all sorts of things, because getting that variety of opinions is what's going to help us pick the right things to prioritize. Another factor you should consider when you're prioritizing which tests to run or which personalizations to implement is the traffic that we're going to be working with. When I think about this, it's about testing, and the amount of traffic that we have will dictate the types of tests that we can run or how long we have to wait. So if we're working with a page on your site that gets low traffic, or maybe your site just in general gets low traffic, then we need to think about the tests that we're going to try out, and we want them to have either a greater change between the two, between the A and the B, right? Or we're going to know that we need to wait a longer time because we need to get to the point where we have a statistically significant winner to know which way to go. Now, if we have higher traffic sites, it makes our job a little bit easier. The change between A and B could be a little bit more subtle, right? Or if not, we can just wait a shorter amount of time. Ultimately, the more traffic we have, the easier testing becomes. But even if you have a lower traffic site, you can still adapt your tests to get meaningful results. So thinking about how to prioritize which test to run or which experience to change, I think one way to envision this is the grid that I have on the screen right now, right? We have impact from low to high on the vertical, and we have speed from slow to fast on the horizontal, right? And if we have something that is both high impact and quick to launch, that ends up in this upper right quadrant. And that's, the magic quadrant, so to speak, for us. Anything that ends up there is something we want to prioritize. Things that are fast to do and have a lot of impact, obviously those are things that we really want to focus on. If we have things that are down in the lower left quadrant, the low impact, slow to launch, those are things that we probably don't want to focus on as much, right? If it's going to take a long time to do something and we're not going to get a whole lot of impact out of it, there are probably things that we could do that are a little bit better for us. Where it becomes a little bit more interesting is when things end up in the high impact, slow to launch, or the low impact, quick to launch quadrants, because each of those has a trait that we really like and one that we really don't. So, one way to approach that is to see if there are things that we can do to the test to move them closer to the upper right quadrant. So if we have something that is high impact but slow to launch, are there ways that we can adjust that test to make it a little faster to launch? More conversely, if we have something that has, is quick to launch but has a low impact, are there ways that we could broaden the impact a bit without reducing the speed to launch to move it up closer to the upper right quadrant? Ultimately, if you've run out of things to do in the upper right quadrant, you're going to have to prioritize those things in the upper left and the lower right. One way to do that is by using a framework. And there's two of them that we've seen, and I'll quickly discuss both of them. One is potential importance in ease, or the PI framework. And the PI framework helps us evaluate which tests to run. So we think about how big the uplift will be, how much traffic does the page get, and what is the investment into those visitors that we've made, and what's the level of effort to implement. For each of these tests, we can evaluate based on these three criteria, and then compare the tests and find out which is the right test to work on. There's another framework that we've also seen used successfully, and it's called the ICE framework. It's similar in that we're trying to ascertain the impact and implementation effort. The difference is that the confidence factor comes into play here. And the more confident we are in the success of the idea, the higher the score. Either of these frameworks can help you rate and compare the ideas and generate a prioritized list. A couple of key learnings. One is, identifying differences in prioritization provides an opportunity to learn from each other. Again, we say it a lot in this talk, but it's really important. The cross-functional team is really important. And when we're in a room and we're talking about the tests, we can find out from a variety of different viewpoints, like which tests are more important and which will have the most impact and why. Also, we want to really focus on the moments that matter. So we don't want to boil the ocean. There are going to be many, many opportunities to improve the user experience. But as you start to prioritize those opportunities, you will find that there are a few moments in a customer's journey that really matter. And we really want to focus on those moments that matter. This is where you're going to move the needle and impact positively the users on your system. Now that we've prioritized the opportunities, we need a plan. Amanda will walk us through that topic.
All right, step 5, plan. So at this point, you may be thinking about your own situation and thinking that you're ready to start tomorrow. Or maybe you're thinking that there's a lot that needs to happen and that a lot of change needs to happen within your organization before you can really get started. But no matter where you are on that spectrum, I've got some news for you. And the good news and the bad news is that digital experiences are never really done. And because digital experiences are evergreen, it means that no matter where you are on your personalization journey, and no matter how digitally mature either your organization or the product you're working on is, there's always opportunity and need to continue to evolve. So as you start putting your plan in place and you look back at the evaluation and think about where those gaps are, just keep in mind that we recommend really more of a program model as opposed to a project model, because this isn't something where you're going to be one and done. It's something that you'll want to evolve over time. And as you're getting your plan together, don't forget that you don't need to boil the ocean. And you can really start where you are today, because there are personalization techniques that you can apply no matter whether or not you're ready to crawl, walk, or run. So if you're just getting started, try looking at what you can personalize based on the things that you already know about someone, based on their location in the world and geolocation, whether they've interacted with marketing campaigns that you're running, the number of times that they've visited an experience, or even what device they're using. And if you've already started on that personalization journey, you can introduce more complex changes based on browser behavior, click paths, other information about the profile, or event completion. And as you continue to get better, you can use personalization for orchestrated journeys, including CRM integration, cross-channel behavior, and a combination of any or all of the things above. So don't worry about what you haven't done yet, and don't try and boil the ocean. Just find a testable hypothesis that your teammates agree is achievable and has value, and start working towards that with the team of people that you've identified as your personalization team. And really, with that, it's all about communication. And if it hasn't come through loud and clear so far, it's creating that shared understanding with the people that you're going to be working with as a team, and planning together, since this is something that you're going to continue to do over time. So moving to extra lessons learned, Chris, I'll ask you, if folks watching this presentation take one thing away, what would that thing be?
I think it's the cross-functional team. I think that's the thing that we run into pretty much every client we've run into, is that there's lots of silos, and it takes real effort to get a cross-functional team to work together, but it's super important in this type of program. How about you, Amanda? What do you think?
I would say it would really be to take heart that even if you aren't really on that journey yet, that you can find a way to make personalization meet you where you are, and to start with something that's relatively modest, where you have a hypothesis that you can test that will bring some value but isn't going to take that much effort. Because if you can get that one win under your belt, it'll be a lot easier for you to get more people to help and to get funding over time.
Great. It looks like there's some questions, but John Meck has been answering a bunch of them, and I know others have as well. So are there any unanswered questions out there that Amanda or I could answer? Yeah, I know one of the questions I saw come through a lot was, what types of tools are used, and There's a variety of different tools I've used. Acquia Lift, or I think it's called Acquia Personalization now. I know I've seen Smart Content, which is a module you can use with Drupal 8. Although I don't have a ton of experience, I played around with it a little bit. That's interesting. Google Optimize is also a great tool because you can use it for free to just kind of get started. Optimizely is there as well. And then you think about things like Mautic does this type of thing as well. So there's lots to choose from. And I think the important thing is to kind of understand, what types of personalization you want to do, and what, are you leaning more towards the A/B testing part of this, or are you really, focused on, using Drupal content to drive personalization? Based on those types of questions, and the requirements you have, you can figure out, what the best tool is for you. And it looks, I think, Amanda, maybe there's a question about tips for tagging content. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
I hate to give the consultant's answer of it depends, but I think there's probably a slightly different answer depending on kind of how organized and structured your content currently is. But I do like the idea of, if you've got topics that people might be interested in, or events, going back to the example of kind of the hospital system, it could be based on the type of care that they're looking for, or like whatever the goal is that they're trying to achieve, and really balancing the way that you kind of structure your taxonomy and talk about the different types of tagging, so that you're looking both at the business goals, but also at the user goals. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is find that like commonality where we can achieve both what the person wants to do within that experience and also help the business out, because that's why we're professionals.
There was another question that came through about personalization in screen readers. And I'll be honest, I haven't seen much action with that, and I suspect based on how they work, they probably do pose a problem, because it's a lot of asynchronous JavaScript going back and forth to work through what's happening on the page and swapping content out and deleting content. So I suspect there are definitely going to be challenges there for sure.
I see a question about the kind of the illustration showing kind of the product maturity life cycle and adapt or die. When the question here is, when's a good time to evaluate when to die? And I would say that that's just for any digital product. There's a set of ways that you can look at it to see if it's time to kind of sunset it. And that would be, is it still creating value for the business? Is it, either generating revenue, or is it something that is kind of foundational for enabling something else? So I would look at it really from a value and cost perspective, as well as, whether or not it's something that's bringing value to the business as well as to the people that are using that product. But that's again, another topic that would be its own talk all of it itself.
And there's another question about functional personalization. So not just swapping out content. That's a good question. Not sure that I have any great examples off the top. I mean, the interesting thing about personalization is, it can be just that swapping out of content. But, and I don't know if this would be what you'd call functional, but we've worked with a client that is a really large entertainment services client. And they have so many different types of people that come in with different parameters that we've used AI to help drive the content that you would see on their site, on their homepage. So I would see a completely different homepage than you would. So again, it's content swapping, but it's done at a really, really high level with, lots of data, and it's based on AI, to make those choices in the content. One example, and then someone answered it as well, which is great. Could you provide a link to a Drupal site that currently uses personalization? You can go to bounteous.com. We eat our own dog food, so we do actually do a fair amount of personalization there. we could probably come up with a few more examples as well. But hit me up on Twitter or something. I think I could point you in the right direction. I don't see any more questions, and I appreciate everyone hanging out. Is there a link to the slides? I will get a link out to the slides. I didn't get that prepared before the talk, but I will get them out. And if you follow me on Twitter, I'll tweet it out for you. It's @cgreeton on Twitter. All right. Thanks everyone for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.